Hi, I'm Matt Carey, documentary editor at Deadline.com. Welcome to the Deadline Studio at Sundance. We are with Matt Wolf, the director of Pee-wee as himself, which is premiering in the episodic section of Sundance. Congratulations on this.
Thank you.
Pee-wee as himself. We're talking about Pee-wee Herman, who was created by Paul Reubens. You spent an extraordinary amount of time with Paul Reubens, not knowing that he was ill, but this is really, of course, as it wound up in the very later stages of his life.
Yeah, I mean, my relationship with Paul started really during peak pandemic. I was introduced to him by the Safdies. There was a rumor in the trades that they were working together, which wasn't true, and I approached Josh, who I knew, telling him that Paul was a dream subject of mine, and my producer, Emma Tillinger-Koskoff, was approached separately by Paul, who had interest in doing a documentary but didn't know how to navigate that process. And given that rumor that was out there, probably on Deadline, she connected him to the Safdies, and they said, "We have a director we want you to meet." So they match-made us, and during that initial conversation with Paul, he said exactly what's at the beginning of the film. I want to direct the film myself, and everybody's advising me against it. And I said, well, I'm here to talk to you about interviewing it, and let's get to know each other and maybe conceive of how to tell your story. And that began a dialogue that went on for months, literally hundreds of hours of phone and Zoom conversations that all kind of led up to what became a 40-hour interview over the course of 10 days with Paul. So the level of conversation and information that was shared over that was significant, but we also decided to start documenting aspects of our relationship. But of course, after Paul passed away, there was a certain kind of dramatic irony inherent to that conversation, and I started to read the 1,500-page transcript the day he died,
Wow.
and within it found things that had taken on a new sort of significance in the context of his death.
Why do you think he didn't share with you that he was ill and you know?
I don't know. I think I have to be really diligent about not speaking for Paul because he's not here to speak for himself. But Paul told almost nobody that he was sick. He was a very private person, and I can imagine that there was something kind of important about telling his story not in a sentimental way or in a way that kind of projected mortality, but to tell it in a straightforward and direct way.
Mm-hmm. I think the word contentious has been applied to your relationship with Paul. It is fascinating, the sort of tug of war between you, where he was deeply ambivalent about having anyone else tell his story. And as you say, his instinct was to tell it himself, and yet he was sort of apparently, or he got the sense that, well, maybe it's a bit taboo to tell your own story. But you had this constant struggle for control, and he was deeply, maybe suspicious would be the word, of anyone shaping a narrative about him, or very concerned about that.
Yeah, I mean, there was certainly a power struggle between Paul and I, and the relationship was thrilling, and it could also be very contentious. But I empathized with Paul, and I understood where he was coming from. He's somebody who lost control of his personal narrative in the media, and of course he would be suspicious of the documentary process or confounded that a filmmaker like myself would have final cut or the agency to tell his story. And you know, I came into the project wanting to be an advocate for Paul, and a lot of what I do as a documentary filmmaker is to work collaboratively with somebody to tell their story, but act as a translator to help frame a collection of experiences with a lot of complexity into a coherent story. And so that's what I aim to do, but it could be a tough process.
And in some ways he lost control almost over himself, in the sense that Pee-wee became this alter ego, but Pee-wee became famous. Paul Reubens was not so famous, and he clearly was ambivalent about that. So it was almost a little bit in the way that Candice Bergen has talked about Edgar Bergen, her father, and Charlie McCarthy, that she was envious of Charlie McCarthy and that relationship. There's almost an envy, maybe that's too strong a word, of Paul vis-a-vis Pee Wee Herman, that character took on its own life, and he lived in the shadow of Pee Wee Herman.
That was very much by design, and I think Paul really valued his privacy and appreciated having a life separate from the character he was known for. I think as an artist, he was of multiple minds, and did want that recognition, but that he was much more comfortable having people believe that Pee Wee Herman was a real person, that to him was a conceptual art project that he was very diligent and strict about maintaining.
Well, he was, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that's really rather startling in the film is that he's very comfortable talking with you about his sexuality, which is surprising in the sense that he was not public about it. I mean, to my knowledge, he never came out.
I wouldn't say he was comfortable with it, but I think he had decided that he wanted to come out in the documentary. And I wanted to help him do that. And I was proud of him for doing that on his own terms. We're of different generations. I'm gay, and I've made a lot of films about queer history. And I empathize with and really respect generational differences around that. And it was at once a source of connection and tension between Paul and I, but I thought that he did a beautiful job coming out in the film.
Yeah, he talks about certainly his first love, and that he got from his first boyfriend, he got some of the sort of ways of speaking that then were turned into the Pee Wee Herman character. So he's quite revealing about it. And
yeah, I found there to be an incredible significance to that relationship, an early relationship that ended when Paul really chose to focus on his career, and he decided not to open himself up to another relationship like that and to go into the closet to focus on his career. It was very poignant, but it was also a moment where Paul kind of became two separate people. It really laid the groundwork for the project of Pee Wee versus Paul.
we see in the film that he created Pee Wee at the Groundlings in Los Angeles. You know, he was very close with Phil Hartman there, who later, of course, became known for SNL. Paul auditioned for SNL, was not chosen. That's one of the misses there from Lorne Michaels, one has to say. But he had so many other characters. How would you describe the breadth of his talent? I think this film really gives us a sense that he was a brilliant artist.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key to Paul's talent as a performer is restraint, particularly in the use of his face. He called it mugging. He could make the tiniest gestures with his face and it would be captivating. He had a Buster Keaton kind of quality to him. And he's a wildly creative and cool person. I think he had an amazing taste, and that I appreciated that he channeled that into one character and kept iterating on it in imaginative ways. I think some people are of the mindset that, you know, if you continue to develop a character and find insight and opportunity in that there's a certain kind of power to that as opposed to dispersing yourself into many different things. And Paul really believed that and was committed to that alter ego.
We see that he also had mixed feelings, seems to be a theme of certainly the film and his life, where he shot to a much higher level of fame with Pee-wee's Big Adventure, directed by a very young Tim Burton. And we see that Paul really selected Tim Burton to direct it. However, when it came out, he was not pleased with that Tim kind of got all the credit for the genius elements of the film and its creativity, and Paul felt like maybe he didn't get sufficient credit for that.
I think in a way, Paul always had to grapple with the choice he made to make people believe that Pee-wee was a real person and to maintain his anonymity. I think in some ways it was a very comfortable and safe way for him to be in the world as a public personality, and in other ways there were downsides to that. And recognition and visibility as an artist is complex when you're the alter ego of Pee Wee Herman. And, you know, as a filmmaker, I try to really lean into people's ambivalence and the fact that we all as people hold multiple feelings at once. And Paul was he was self-aware enough to tap into his own ambivalence about certain things that happened in his life.
Yeah, it's a two-part episodic. And it's just so powerful. I was deeply moved by it. I found it very poignant. And I must say that I felt there were so many elements of Paul Reubens that were unresolved, just unresolved feelings maybe about his sexuality in terms of whether he was open with the public about it, ambivalence clearly about making this film, but there's something almost tragic. Maybe tragic is a little bit too strong a term, but one feels for him and you just wish he was alive still and could be fully realizing himself, fully finding his comfort level as a person and in the society as a famous, artist and actor.
Yeah, I wish Paul was here to see the film. I think that Paul was aware of the imprint he had and the impact he has as an artist on multiple generations, and did not take that for granted. But it's very poignant to be here without him.
Absolutely, it's for HBO. What can you tell us about the anticipated premiere on HBO?
Spring 2025.
Spring, okay, absolutely. And what does it mean to you to premiere this at Sundance?
I mean, there's no more of an electric atmosphere, particularly for documentaries, than Sundance. And the festival was so generous to allow us to show both parts. It's 3 hours and 15 minutes long. It's a very epic journey. And I'm so grateful that we were able to show both parts and to present it as a film instead of a series.
It's incredibly moving. It is. Pee-wee as himself. We've been joined by the director, Matt Wolf. Congratulations on your Sundance premiere.
Thank you.